Hi, I'm Kevin Rogers, and once again, you're listening to Sidewalk Skyline podcast. Today, I have a person that I wish I could have seen more of in the last couple of years, Gary Connors. We work together with Mission Canada, and he's the one that is focused on Quebec and Francophone Canada. And I always enjoy in-person meetings with Gary because he'll often bring fresh bagels from Montreal to our meetings. And if I'm not careful, he might sneak up and give me a kiss on the cheek in European style, even though he's not European. Welcome, Gary. And it's great to be with you today. And I know I won't get a bagel or a peck on the cheek today from you, but good to have you on the podcast today.
Bonjour, mon ami Kevin. C'est bon d'être avec vous et avec tous ceux qui nous écoutent. Great to be with you, Kevin. And, even in the COVID area, it's pretty hard to give you that Montreal two-cheek kiss, but it's in my heart. There you go.
Kiss my mask.
Oh, I hope you don't get the letters wrong on that, I'll tell you.
Well, we're off to a good start already. I could see that now.
I think we better start
over. Well, Gary, you've given much of your adult life to serving God in Quebec, and especially in the Montreal area. So we're going to talk about some of your work today. So why don't you just give me just the elevator speech on all the things that you're involved in currently with ministry in Montreal and Quebec.
Well, presently I'm as you had just mentioned, I'm the Quebec and Francophone Canada coordinator within Mission Canada, as you are the coordinator for Urban Center Ministry. I'm also the coordinator for something that's called FIT4M, and I know we're going to talk about it a bit later in the podcast, which means Friends Intensive Training for Ministry. Basically, it's a program that we offer to Bible college graduates from our colleges and credential holders who feel called to ministry within French Canada. And so we offer them a linguistic and a cultural pastoral training for a year period as they go into ministry somewhere in French Canada. Also, I'm involved in ministry with my home church, Evangel, in downtown Montreal with Pastor Patty Miller and with Rob Moore. I'm on the lead team, on the developing team of the church. And so I try to be very involved with my local community here on a unofficial basis. Try to get involved sports activities, curling, golf. Met some great people here in the community, and now that I'm no longer in charge of such of a ministry within the Montreal area, you do have to find ways of connecting with your community and be purposeful, and just trying to do that, trying to finish well my ministry and to be alive in a good way. Now,
I think you live in Hudson.
Yeah, I live in a low community of about 5,500 people.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's a bit of a different community than what you would think of for the province of Quebec, because it's about 85% English, believe it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just off the island of Montreal, heading towards Ottawa.
Mm-hmm.
And a nice little community. Like any community, even a community like Hudson, which is, you would say, 85% English, an English community in Quebec is different than an English community even in the rest of Canada.
Right.
Veut veut pas, as they would say, or would you want to or not, living in Quebec sure is different than living in the rest of Canada, in the sense of whole cultural difference, and which is a big part of when you grow up here. I'm from the Eastern Townships, from a city called Sherbrooke. Sherbrooke as well used to be a very English loyalist type area. It's changed over the years. An area that used to be, maybe 60% French and 40% English has now changed to maybe about 85% French. But coming from that background, I was brought up French and English. I was brought up Roman Catholic. My mom was Roman Catholic. My dad was actually United Church. He was a coal miner down in Nova Scotia. And during the war, he, before going overseas, he had to train in Sherbrooke, and that's where he met my mom. And in 1945, they got married. I came along in 1952. But back then, when a Protestant person married a Catholic person within the Catholic Church, they had to promise to raise their family Catholic. And so I went to Catholic school, French school for 4 years. And then the rest of my education was in English. I went to Sainte Thérèse d'Avila, I went to St. Pat's High School, then ended up at a regional school for the last year of my high school training. And so I've always had the French and English in who I was as a person. And so even if you are English, outside of the Montreal metropolitan area, there's really two big areas in the province of Quebec. You have the Montreal metropolitan area, and then you sort of have the rest of Quebec. And the rest of Quebec is very French, but the Montreal area is very cosmopolitan and, very much both. And the townships was both, but more and more it's becoming more French. So a bit of that's my background, raised Roman Catholic till I was 19. And I know you were going to ask me something about, how I came to know the Lord, but
well, go ahead.
That time at 19, 5 of us guys, we went out west to work. We were going to work on oil rigs in different places, ended up working different places, oil rigs, farmers. And then I ended up, which I now know today was really in the sovereign will of the Lord, working for a Pentecostal farmer. He was had a big ranch, had Charolais cattle, Maine Anjou cattle. His wife had Arabian horses, a big thing. And but what I really liked about working with him is he didn't work on Sundays because it was the Sabbath, the Lord's day.
Right.
And I like that. All my friends who went out with me had to work on Sundays, but I got my Sundays off. Then near the end of my stint working for him, I remember he invited me to church on a Sunday.
That would be my dog.
That's okay. So I went to a evangelical free church with him in the morning, and then in the evening I went to his Pentecostal church. Well, you must know, a gentleman like myself who's always raised in the Roman Catholic Church, has never been in another type of church, going into a Pentecostal church where there was people playing the accordion, the guitar, and the banjo, and everybody. It was quite an experience for me. Very intriguing, to say the least.
Yeah.
Through that and through other experiences, he sent me to a week of meetings at a Bible college, and at that Bible college, with the person I was with, whose room I was staying with, billeting, led me to Christ, and that was back in 1971. So actually, just in 2021, I celebrated my 50th year as being a born-again believer, just in the fall of 2021. So I was a very special time. So came back to Quebec and went to Bible college, so on and so forth. Gives you a bit of my background there, Kevin.
Yeah. And now how about Gwen, your wife? Is she Quebecois as well?
No, Gwen is from Ottawa. She born and raised in actually a Christian home, and I met her at Bible college when I went there in 1972. She thought she was going to go into journalism, but she felt the call of God in her life to at least do 1 year at Eastern Pentecostal Bible College. And then she thought, well, she'd continue her studies and go for journalism. Well, I guess the Lord had different plans for her and I. She actually stayed 3 years at the college, and so did I. And so Gwen Gwen and I, we have two children,
Mm-hmm.
Stephen and Andrea. Both of them are married. My son is married to Kara and has two kids. So we have two grandkids, a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old.
Oh,
And
that's the best thing going, isn't it?
it is
Having
really great.
grandkids. Yeah.
And my daughter and her husband, he's an Estonian gentleman.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have any kids
Mm-hmm.
as of now, but
Mm-hmm.
that's my family. Yeah. And Gwen and I, we pastored in Quebec City
Mm-hmm.
from 1975 to 1983. I worked with a gentleman called Al Bowen, and we
Mm-hmm.
assisted him there. And then in 1983, I became the senior pastor of l'Assemblée du Plein Évangile, full gospel church in LaSalle, Quebec. And I pastored there from 1983 to 1996.
Mm-hmm.
1996 till 2009, I was working as the district superintendent, assistant district superintendent for 3 years in the District of East Ontario in Quebec. And then when the District of Quebec got formed in the year 2000, I became the superintendent up until 2009. And then in 2009, I became the coordinator for Quebec and Francophone Canada and Mission Canada at the same time as working with my home church, Evangel, a Pentecostal church. I went on staff for a couple of years. Then I was asked to be the Bible College president of our French Bible College, and I did that for 9 years until June of 2020. So those are some of those ministry activities that I've had. And Gwen has been there with me, and she's been a great supporter. Has had her own ministry, more out in the public, worked in healthcare and so forth. So it's been great.
Well, you've certainly have had a rich and fulfilling life thus far.
And I'm only 52, so there you go.
Yeah, that's amazing. So on the PAOC website, it says that in Quebec, less than 6% of Catholics go to Mass on Sundays on a regular basis. Sunday morning attendance in Protestant evangelical churches makes up less than 1% of the Quebec population. More than 700 municipalities in Quebec with no evangelical church. So missiologists have described Quebec as the largest mission field for the gospel in the Western Hemisphere. Now, I always think that if I had never visited Montreal a few times, if I'd never been to Quebec City and a few other places, there would be so many things that would be mysterious and unknown to me about Quebec. One of the things that I'm intrigued by is the rapid decline of Roman Catholicism in Quebec, and how that was such a Catholic stronghold in Canada. And then, when we think about today and the challenges for non-Catholic Christians to engage in church life, to plant churches, to share their faith. Why don't you give us some insight into what it's like to be a Jesus follower? Well, certainly in Montreal, you're going to have a more cosmopolitan experience, but throughout the rest of Quebec, tell me some stories and help me get a handle on what it's like to be a Christ follower in Quebec.
Okay, well, that's a good question because it makes me think of how we sometimes, the expression, how do you look? Is the glass half full or half empty? Or remember that illustration you might have heard before where the shoe salesman goes to Africa and he, many, many years ago, and he writes back to his company and says, sorry, bring me home. No one wears shoes here. As well, the other shoe salesman goes out there and sends a note back home and says, hey, I want to stay here. Send all the shoes you can. No one has shoes here. So oftentimes it's the way we look at the way things are. I think it's a wonderful time for the gospel in the province of Quebec. I just think it's a time where there's a real, I think there's a desire to have something real. If the shell of a organization has lost its influence on a society, what a great space for the reality of the gospel and a relationship with Jesus to fill that gap, to fill that space. It's amazing, Kevin. My wife, she was the volunteer coordinator at a palliative care residence in Western Montreal for many years. And she always tells me this one particular conversation she had with the main doctor at the palliative care residence and a nurse who was there interning, I think the young nurse was about 25 or 26. And Gwen and the doctor were talking about Malcolm Gladwell's book, David and Goliath,
Oh, yeah.
Books he wrote. And then they were talking about the different areas of it. And then the young nurse interrupted them and they said, "Excuse me, who's David and Goliath?"
Yeah.
It's like both my wife, who's a believer, and the doctor, who's not necessarily what we would call born again believer in the same way that we do, but had at least the background of a Christian education. Like they said, what? There's an emptiness. There's not necessarily. Yes, there is an adverse sense to an institution or to someone want to come along and make you like them. But there's really no adverse to somebody wanting to talk about a relationship that would be alive and living. I do think as we live our life in a manner that would portray our Christian principles, what we believe as believers, we do live differently than others. We are perceived differently, but we're not understood necessarily why, and questions are asked. Well, why this and why that? And it really makes me think of the scripture that says, always be prepared to give an answer for the faith that we have inside us. And don't feel any huge opposition to me as a believer, as a person, as long as my relationship is a real relationship with them, as long as I don't see people as projects.
Right.
If I see, I made mention of being involved here in Hudson with people. Well, my result is wanting to be involved with them as people, getting to know them, and them getting to know me, maybe not understanding who I am completely, but knowing that, hey, I can be a Christ follower. I can have principles. I can have absolutes in my life. And I think in our society here in Quebec, people just don't have always absolutes, and they realize there's something missing. And we have the message of Christ, which is an absolute. And I think we have to be careful the way we do it. I think we have to live, in a way that will reflect who Christ is, his character, his person, and even our faith walk and our faith life says a lot. Now, haven't answered your question completely, but it gives a bit of an idea how I look at the province of Quebec and Quebec in general. Yes, faith is down. Those figures that you talked about are figures that I myself have put on the PUC website. 6% of people, might be on church on a Sunday morning.
Yeah.
But if you look at the statistics, if you look at the registry, you might find there's 80% of the province is Catholic. When they write down out with the census, but how many really have a real relationship with Christ? When we say there's less than 1% of the population that would be in a church on a Sunday morning, the whole idea is that out of the 8.4 to 8.6 million people living in the province, maybe 70 to 80,000 people would be what we call in a traditional evangelical church. Now, there can be very many more on the outside of that. And I believe even within the Catholic Church, there are many, many people who have a true faith in the Lord, and that number can be much, much higher.
Yeah.
When we talk about, Kevin, you mentioned the talk about 1.8 million people in their communities have no church. Well, that is so true. Like, because of my positions and working within our assemblies, I've had a chance to travel a lot across Canada and see how it is in other municipalities in the rest of Canada. I can always remember this one time I was in Saskatchewan and Saskatoon, staying at the pastor's house, and I walked from his house to the church one day. And as I was, wasn't that far away. And as I was walking, I saw many, what we would call evangelical Protestant churches, nursing homes that were made by Protestant evangelicals, a hospital. And I'm walking by all this and I'm thinking, wow, this is so different than when we live. Because you'll have communities in Quebec, 15,000 people, who will not have an evangelical, witness in there. Now, I believe there's probably maybe some Christians who belong to a church, but there's no evangelical witness community within that church, and there's a lot of those going on. So that's where the scenery is a bit different when you're in the province of Quebec. You'll go to the rural church towns and you'll see huge churches, Catholic churches, but the vast majority of them are empty. Or if you go in, they've been turned into gymnasiums, or they've been turned into restaurants, or they've been turned to something else. There's a real chance for things to be done in the province of Quebec at this particular time. And there's really not an adversity. There's maybe an adversity to what people see on TV coming from, other areas and saying, oh, that's what these religious people do. Yeah. But there's no constant. Until I became a Christian, I had never read a Bible. I knew there was one in the attic, but I had never read it myself. And when I actually read, had told me, it says in 1 John 5, 11, 12, and 13, that he who has the Son of God has life. He who does not have the Son of God does not have life. I've written this to you who believe in the name of the Son of God, that you may know that you have eternal life. That was the night that my life changed. The scriptures who spoke to my heart that said, Gary, you can know. You don't have to wait till you die and you have this sort of, balance. Did I do enough good things? Was I good enough? Was I bad enough? And that's the way I sort of saw the way it was going to be. It's pretty easy when you're judging yourself to think, yeah, I was a pretty good guy. I think I'll make it. But when that gentleman at that Bible college asked me, he said, Gary, if you should die tonight, are you sure to go to heaven? And then he asked me, he said, Gary, if you were in front of the Lord, and he said, why should I let you into heaven? What would you say? Well, I basically said, well, I've been a pretty good guy. I didn't do this, didn't do that. And he basically told me the truth of the gospel. He says, you know what? It really doesn't matter what you did, Gary. It's what he did. And if you have Jesus in your heart, the Bible says that you may know you have eternal life. Well, just that seed of truth just changed my life completely, because it was never presented to me in that way. And I really think that message really can do a lot in even today within our society where we live. But people need to know that we're real people. They need to know that, we're not strange, but maybe we are different, that's for sure.
Gary, when I was in Eastern Pentecostal Bible College back in the 80s, there was a time when I gave real heartfelt consideration to the FLIGHT program. That was French language intensive training for evangelism. And the commitment back then was that you could go to study the language, and you would it would be paid for to study, and then the return was to stay in Quebec for at least 2 years, engaging in ministry and church planting.
I thought it was the rest of your life.
Well, yeah, they just wanted to put anybody that was squeamish, give them a note, I never did respond to go to Quebec, but over the years, every time I go to Montreal, I just love your city so much, and I think I'm tempted to relocate here, just because it's such a fascinating place. But I also have a family and a church that I pastor, and I don't think they would be too happy if I did that. It would have to be the Lord speaking loud and clear. But anyways, just thinking back to those days with the flight program, and there were several English-speaking Canadians that went from Bible college, studied the French language intensively, and then planted churches. And eventually that petered out, but in its place, FIT4M has emerged. And so talk to me about FIT4M, and is it many of the same objectives as the flight program, or tell me about it. And we'll put all of these things that we discuss, we'll put in the show notes so that people can go online and learn more.
Yeah, FIT4M, that's an acronym which stands for French Intensive Training for Ministry. And it is a program that we rebooted the flight program. The flight program had been very effective over a 30-year period from 69 to 84. I'm sorry, 15-year period. There were over 58 participants in that program. And through them, over 29 either ministries or churches were started by those 58 people who participated in the program. And many of those are still working today. Those churches are still very thriving today, and many of them that were started back then. And my wife actually took the flight program after she graduated from Bible college. But just, programs change, and there was a 30-year period from 1984 to 2014 where it wasn't the time for that program to continue. But in 2013, there was that sense again of a Macedonian call. When I say Macedonian call, like really the call back in the 70s when the flight program was on, that was sort of the metaphor that was given, was as Quebec is crying out to the rest of Canada saying, come, help us, bring the message. I think in the 80s and 90s and also the early 2000s, the restructuring here in the province, the two organizational structures that became one, the starting of the District of Quebec, that whole structural side was where the emphasis needed to be. But then when you get past 2010 and 2011, and the figures are saying, there needs to be a new Macedonian call. There needs a new call to say, whoever will come, help us. And there's such a great need in the province of Quebec. There's a dearth. There's, as you said, missiologists across North America see it as a very prime location for missions. And so we felt, how can we again reach out to Canada? And we thought maybe by rebooting our flight program to a new generation of people who would sense of call. So we've changed it in a bit, because back in the 70s, we used to own property in Quebec City, and students would come live in that property. And then after they've gone through the Université Laval in Quebec City in their linguistic program, they would be out. The then home missions department of the PUC would provide lodging for them in some city. either buy a mobile home or provide rental for a church and so forth. Boy, that's gone by the wayside because the monies just aren't there. So what we've done in this new program is we've associated with institutions here in the province of Quebec. We have working understandings with UQAM, which is the University of Quebec in Montreal. We have working relationships with linguistics institutions here in Quebec, and we are hoping we can do it in Northern Ontario or in the Maritimes as well, where they have French universities and French linguistic programs. So if anybody would feel called to do ministry in the province of Quebec or in French Canada, you would come here, you would take that 1-year linguistic program, and while you're taking the program, a person would be placed on the pastoral staff of a host church. So we have relationships with host churches, French host churches in the province of Quebec. And while they're learning their linguistic programs, they're given ministry commensurate to the amount of French they know. So during that 1 year, they're not only learning the language, they're learning the culture. They're learning what it is to be in the province, the differences. And so, by the way, if anybody's wanting to know how different Quebec is from the rest of Canada, our pastor, Pastor Maddie Miller, who was from Western Ontario, when she came here, she read a book about the differences in Quebec and in the rest of Canada, and she did a series in the church, a fantastic series. Says, if Jesus was a Quebecer, I would just say, listeners, you can go and see it. And Kevin, you said you're going to put these
we'll
resources
link to that.
on. It's a great series to listen to. So ministry is different here. So as people are learning the linguistic side, they're learning the culture. And then we, as a movement, the Mission Canada, we do provide educational as free of charge. They learn their education, their linguistic education is paid for.
Mm-hmm.
Their room and board is paid for, taken care of by that local church. And incidentals, we work on providing those as well for those participants who come. And really the commitment is you need to see whether for another 2 years you can work somewhere in French Canada. And that can be differently. Like just a couple of years ago, we had a couple who came from Kelowna, BC, Val and Tom Harbour. And an older couple, not really that old, maybe just a bit younger than you, Kevin, but they were both counselors, but they've had a heart to learn French and to minister to the French people. Well, they came here, did their 1 year of schooling at UQAM, got a 1 year certificate in university. They've added it to their educational portfolio. While they were here, they pastored to one of our downtown local churches here in Montreal, Gospel V. And now they've gone back to Kelowna and they are starting a French community, Christian community fellowship within their particular area. And they're keeping their relationship with Gospel Life Church here in Montreal. And so they sensed a call to come here to Quebec, learn French, go back to their area and minister to the French people where they live. They're being supported by the District of BC in doing this. Now, very interesting, at the same time as this couple came from Kelowna Church, another couple came from Kelowna Church, came to Quebec, took the program, Cal and Chrissy Cron, but they stayed in Montreal and are actually attached to our church where I am. But their ministry is to downtown Montreal, and they're working with you actually in the urban area of working with a kitchen that's providing food for the needy in downtown Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
Working there. Another young gentleman, his name is David Ritz, came here a number of years ago, did basically the same thing, took the linguistic program, but not through FIT4M. He had come on his own at the time. Well, he's working with the universities and colleges, and mainly with the program we have, just the name slips, you know what it is.
Red Frogs?
Red Frogs, yeah.
Yeah.
And working and having a fantastic influence in our McGill University and all the other campuses in downtown
Mm-hmm.
Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of that is related to programs like FIT4M. And so today, like up until the the pandemic, I visit a lot the Bible colleges, go in churches, talk about the need in Quebec, and tell them about the FIT4M program. The program is there, if there are people who would like to be involved, you can go to the website, look at what it takes to be involved, and we'd sure love to have you be a part of the ministry here in Quebec.
There's you mentioned being involved in your local church evangel, and Patty Miller is going to be one of our guests on an upcoming episode. Graham Singh is going to be on,
great.
and so we're going to try and do some deep dive into Montreal in some of the future episodes.
That would be great.
Yeah. I'm curious, when we talk about Francophone Canada, there are large pockets of French as first language people in various parts of Canada. Where are some of the large Francophone communities outside of Quebec?
You'll have Northern Ontario, Eastern Ontario, Northern Ontario has a big population. And it's very interesting, like, cities like Sudbury, surprisingly, not 44% of the population speak French. Other areas as well, like a couple of years ago, Jamie Shepherd invited me down to his church in
Welland.
To speak on a Sunday morning service for Canada Day. It was really an interesting day because we had an English service at 9 o'clock, and we had a French service at 11 o'clock. And anything that was done in English at the 9 o'clock service, we did at 11 o'clock in the French service. And we even had pancakes and French maple syrup I brought with me in between the services. It was a real French Canadian morning. All the worship was in French that morning. Why? Because in that whole Welland area, there's a whole big pocket of French people. And there are pockets of French people across Canada. And, out where Tom and Val and Kelowna, there's an area there where a lot of people go picking fruit in the summertime. And a lot of people have stuck around or because they've liked the area. And so there are these pockets everywhere, but I would say the biggest area outside of Quebec would be Northern Ontario, Eastern Ontario, and also the Maritimes with the Acadian population in New Brunswick, especially. I would, and actually in Newfoundland as well, in Labrador and so forth. Those are some of the greatest areas. There's, believe it or not, of the 36 million people who live in Canada, over 10 million people speak French.
Is that right?
That's right. Wow. And, inversely to that as well, Kevin, oftentimes when I go and speak about the need in the province of Quebec, I'll be in a province like Saskatchewan and Manitoba, and I'll say, you know what? If you took the population of Saskatchewan plus the population of Manitoba, we'll say about 3,500,000 people, and bring them to Quebec. And if it was technically possible, you could find someone to speak with in English. In the province of Quebec, I said there was 8.4 to 8.6 million people, but of those, there are a lot of French who are bilingual as well. You'd find over 3 million people plus in Quebec who could converse in the English language. So, there's a whole ministry there. Even if somebody says, I really sense a call to minister to English, and I'm sorry, to the Quebecois. Well, there's some Quebecois English too. There's a whole need as well within the English population in the province of Quebec.
You mentioned being on the lead team at Evangel, and one of the projects that you are involved in is they are taking essentially a storefront property around the corner from the church on Rue de Sainte Catherine and tearing it down and building a 14-story high rise. And so tell me what that's all about. What's the objective there?
Now, I'm sure when Pastor Patty and Graham will be with you on our future podcast, they'll really talk about the whole idea on that Peter McGill area where where St. Jack's is, where what's his name is, Graham is, and
Graham, yes.
We do have a philosophy of ministry within that area, is reaching out to the people outside the doors of that church.
Mm-hmm.
We've done the Halo project, and seeing how the church has been influencing that particular area. Well, we've tried to say, okay, how can we as a church be very visible in the area and helping out our community?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of high-rise condominiums in our area, a lot of need for rental space. So instead of building condominiums and trying to get money back for it, we actually thought, what can we do with the space that God has allowed us to have? The church felt led a number of years ago, back when Pastor Mann was pastoring the church, felt the direction to buy an old Saint Hubert barbecue building that was for sale many years ago, when the Forum, where the other religion of Quebec used to live, the Montreal Canadians, where they worshipped, when that building, when the Montreal Canadians left that building and went to their new Bell Center, it's as if the whole area where the church is just across the street just sort of went down completely. And at that particular time, buildings were being sold, and so we actually were able to purchase that building at the time. And in foresight, God allowed that, so that today that particular building that we bought, which we used over many, many years, is now going to be, we should be starting to demolish it in a few months from now, in order to have a building that will serve the community that we are in with its present needs. We're going to have affordable housing in it. We're going to have handicapped housing in it. We're going to provide multifunctional areas for people who live in the building. We will have commercial buildings on commercial storefronts on the storefront, and so all part of trying to be part of the community where we are. And so that is one of the projects. Like, I work on the development team with the rest of the group there. So sure, Pastor Patty will share her whole philosophy around that.
Yeah.
Just trying to be very present in the Peter McGill area. And again, it's part of not just being an institution, but being, someone who's out there doing something for the community. And just a great story, Kevin. Just recently, we gave a bit of a challenge to the church. There's a ministry just outside the doors of our church called trying to help people out in the area, just in front of the church. So we gave a challenge to the church. We said, wouldn't it be nice for Christmas if we could raise $5,000 and hand it out to them, just from that church across the street?
Mm-hmm.
Well, we raised $10,000.
Wow.
And so here's a church is just going to go across and give $10,000 to this group, which is not, evangel, but it's one trying to help the area where we are. Now that speaks volumes. It does. It puts a whole new aspect on, trying to be a part of the community where we are living. And we are hoping that building we are building will be all in line with that. But I'm sure Graham and Patty will give you a lot more than I can on that one, that's for sure.
Yeah. Now, I've heard there are English-speaking churches in different parts of Canada that have partnered with French-speaking churches in Quebec. What can you tell me about those kind of partnerships, and
Yep.
Is that something still happening?
Yes, it is. Basically, about 20 years ago, actually, when I think about it, that's incredible. At the 2002 conference in Victoria, BC, we started promoting the idea of partnerships between churches across Canada with Quebec, churches in Quebec. We've been doing that for the past 20 years. Sometimes we've had churches up over 30 churches from across Canada partnered with a church in the province of Quebec or in French Canada. And that help went from financial help, prayer help, sending teams, building things. Sometimes it was just helping to know how to manage a church and so on and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And that's still on today. So we have, again, this is something I can give to you as an idea. We've prepared best practices on how to be a partner church with a church in the province of Quebec. How a church is saying, okay, I want to be involved with the missional priority of Quebec and Francophone Canada. I'm not going to move there, but how can our church help? Well, sometimes having this almost like a sister church we can work with, maybe a different size, but we have a couple of churches who have been involved in partnerships for 15 years. Churches in Edmonton, churches in BC, with churches in Quebec. It's almost become as if their sister church is almost like a department of their church.
Wow.
When they have their annual reports, they have an annual report from their church in Quebec. And it really does help, it's amazing how a financial help from a church out west will help a church in the province of Quebec being able to have at least a part-time youth director, at least help the pastor move from a tent-making position to maybe a full-time position. So many things can be done. There's so much to do. And again, thank you, Kevin, for even having me on this podcast today to just be able to talk a bit about what God can do through our willing to acquiesce to his leadings by his Holy Spirit in our lives. And, we can look at the dearth of saying, no one's interested in God in Quebec, or we can look the other side and say, hey, what an opportunity. What an opportunity for the gospel of Christ.
Yeah. Well, we'll certainly give contact information so that people can email you, Gary. And I just would throw out the challenge to our listeners to ask, have you ever thought about pursuing a life serving God in Quebec? And if that's ever come across your radar or you're curious, please get in touch with Gary Connors. And he's a good guide to help get people connected.
Self-confessed good guy.
Self-confessed good guy. Yeah. Just one parting question. What's your dream for the cities in Quebec?
I guess it would be to have communities of faith, communities of touch points with the gospel of Christ. I guess I'm very, I'm not looking to say buildings, but I'm looking to say places where Christ will be known, and places where Christ will be experienced. Those touch points where people can come and know the presence of the Lord, whether it be in small groups, whether it be in larger groups, whether it be in the celebratory times of the beautiful worship, or whether it be in marketplace evangelism, and being our cities. Our cities really need to hear the center of our influence. We really need to have the influence of us as believers to bring salt and light where we are planted. Because if we don't bring our light, others surely will not bring our light. They'll bring their light, and the light that we bring, really, we know is the transforming power of the gospel. Like I know personally, it's just transforming my life, and that is just for all cities and communities across. It's a big province, Kevin. We think of Montreal, we think of Quebec City, but there's many areas across this province, and sometimes there's miles and kilometers between them. but each one of those areas need to have a faith community of sorts. So that's my desire to see that. Right now we have about, even within the Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada, about 105 faith communities. We are probably one of the larger denominations, evangelical denominations, although there are many others. None of us feel more superior than anybody, but there's a real place within the province, Kevin.
Mm. Well, Gary, thank you so much for being on the podcast today. And as we go, I just have one request: poppy seed bagel with cream cheese.
I can do that for you.
And that was Gary Connors from Quebec. Hey, in the first episode of season 3, we announced a contest on our Facebook page, and we had a contest to guess what do you think were the most listened to episodes during season 2, 2021. And the winner of the contest is Mary Rogers, and she'll be getting a copy of Kevin Weeb's book. I'll be sending that out to her. So what were the most listened to episodes, you ask? Well, the top most listened episode in 2021 was First Nations and the Canadian Church, an interview that I had with Aaron Mix Ross, who's from Richmond, British Columbia. The second most listened to episode was Sniff, Sneeze, Splice with the PAOC archivist in Mississauga, James Craig. And the third most listened episode was Qualitative Neighboring Part 1. And that was a panel discussion where we talked about intentional community and living out your ministry where you trade your platform for a front porch and focus on ministry into your immediate neighborhood. So congratulations, Mary. We'll get the copy of that book from Kevin Weeb out to you shortly. Now, on our next episode coming up, we have Susan Wells. And Susan Wells has also recently written a book called A Place at My Table, Creating Space to Belong. And I think you're going to enjoy hearing some of Susan's insights, and as we do a deep dive into what it means to be a person of hospitality in the kingdom of God. So until the next time, stay tuned. I'm Kevin Rogers, and you've been listening to Sidewalk Skyline Podcast.